Ellen DeGeneres was just another struggling comic broke unknown performing for half-empty rooms. But in 1986, a single night changed everything. No lights, no gimmicks, just her voice, and one quiet story about God. Then Johnny Carson looked at her, smiled and pointed to the couch. That gesture, it didn't just change her career, it made her legendary. And to understand how one silent moment on national television became the turning point of her life, we need to go back to where it all began. Ellen DeGeneres, a name once synonymous with sunshine. She walked onto stage music, blaring, shoulders bouncing, grinning like the world was weightless, and somehow, for a few minutes each day, it was. She could turn silence into laughter, awkwardness into charm, and ordinary mornings into something magical. Her smile wasn't just a trademark, it was a ritual. Millions began their day with it. America didn't just watch Ellen, it leaned on her. But behind that smile was a truth that most never saw, and few would have believed. The Ellen we adored was carefully crafted not out of deceit, but out of necessity. Behind that grin lived a woman who had learned from a painfully young age that being funny could protect you. That if you made people laugh, they wouldn't hurt you, or worse, ignore you. The woman who turned laughter into a language of connection had once used it as a shield to survive. Comedy wasn't her talent, it was her hiding place. Offstage, Ellen was a master of silence. She had trained herself to hold it all in the pain, the doubts, the memories that still visited her when the lights went out. She knew how to sparkle under pressure, how to smile when she wanted to disappear, how to tell jokes while her chest carried a storm. Because the truth is, the woman who helped America breathe had once struggled to breathe herself. And yet, that's what made her remarkable. She didn't build her empire on perfection, she built it on resilience. Every laugh she gave away was one she had to earn through tears. Every dance down the aisle was a rebellion against the weight she carried. So while the world clapped and laughed and called her a gift, Ellen quietly stitched herself together behind the curtains in dressing rooms in private moments no camera ever saw. The smile that became a symbol was never about pretending to be happy. It was about surviving long enough to create happiness for others and for herself. Because sometimes the people who laugh the loudest are the ones who've cried the hardest. And Ellen knew that better than anyone. Long before the laughter, before the standing ovations and the studio lights, there was a quiet girl growing up in the suburbs of Louisiana, a girl who knew how to make people smile, but never quite learned how to feel safe. At 15, Ellen DeGeneres' world cracked open. Her parents divorced not with screaming matches or dramatic goodbyes, but with an eerie silence that lingered in every room of the house. Her father moved out. Her mother remarried. And for a while, Ellen tried to adjust, tried to laugh through the change. But what came next wasn't just painful. It was shattering. Her new stepfather, the man meant to restore stability, became her nightmare. Ellen later revealed that he sexually abused her. A betrayal that pierced not just her body, but her trust, her sense of reality, and her ability to speak up. Like many young victims, she stayed silent, hoping it would stop, hoping someone would notice. Eventually, she found the courage to tell her mother. But instead of protection, she was met with disbelief. Her mother didn't believe her, or worse, didn't want to. The pain of not being heard cut deeper than the abuse itself. In that moment, Ellen learned something that would shape her forever. Not all wounds are visible, and not every truth is welcomed. That betrayal, not just from the abuser, but from the one person she needed most, became a defining scar. It taught her to question herself, to doubt her worth, to find other ways to cope. And so she began to build walls, not with bricks, but with sarcasm, with cleverness, with humor. Comedy became her language when honesty felt too dangerous. The trauma of those years didn't just disappear. It lingered in her adult relationships, in her need to control her surroundings, in her longing to create safety for others, because she never had it herself. Behind her sharp wit and glowing charm was still that teenage girl desperately wanting to be believed. Ellen never allowed herself to be defined by what happened. But she never forgot it either. And maybe that's why she fought so hard to build a world where everyone felt seen, where no voice was dismissed, where laughter could live, even if it was born from pain. Because long before she became America's voice of joy, she was a child no one heard. And that silence, that deafening silence, changed everything. There are people who are born to be funny, and then there are people who learn to be funny because life gave them no other choice. Ellen was the latter. Humor wasn't something she discovered, it was something she clung to. When the world around her became too dark, laughter became her flashlight. It didn't erase the pain, but it helped her see a way forward. As a teenager walking through the wreckage of broken trust and silent wounds, Ellen realized something that would shape her forever. People don't always listen when you cry, but they do when you make them laugh. So she did. She studied people. Not just their words, but their pauses, their discomfort, the way their eyes lit up when they laughed. She knew when to be quick, when to be quiet, when to turn pain into punchlines. It wasn't just talent, it was survival instinct. She wasn't the class clown. She wasn't trying to be loud. Instead, she slipped humor into conversations like a secret note passed under the table. A clever remark here, a silly observation there. It was subtle, but disarming. People liked her. And most importantly, they stopped asking questions about what was going on behind the smile. At home, it was different. There were no audiences, just silence. But even then, Ellen practiced. In her bedroom in front of the mirror, she'd invent characters, voices, bits of dialogue. She was building something, not a career, not yet, but a space where she was in control, where she could rewrite the narrative, where laughter wasn't just a way to escape, but a way to reclaim power. And the most remarkable part, her humor never came from bitterness. She didn't make fun of others. She made light of pain not to mock it, but to survive it. That's what made her different. That's what made her unforgettable. Before she ever stepped on a stage or stood in front of a crowd, Ellen had already mastered the art of timing, not for applause, but for relief. For a moment of peace in the middle of chaos. That kind of comedy doesn't come from books or workshops. It comes from knowing what it's like to need saving, and finding out that laughter might be the only rope strong enough to hold on to. Before the cameras, before the standing ovations, before the cover stories, the Emmys, the household name Ellen DeGeneres was just another woman trying to keep the lights on. Not lost in ambition, but lost in reality. She drifted through her 20s the way many dreamers do, hungry for something bigger, unsure if it would ever arrive. Her days weren't scripted. They were survival. She worked anywhere that would take her. During the day, she was a legal secretary, fingers flying over keys, typing up other people's battles, while her own dreams sat quietly in the corners of her mind. At night, she became a waitress balancing trays and forced smiles in noisy, forgettable diners. And when even that wasn't enough, she picked up a paintbrush and painted houses under the scorching Louisiana sun. Blistered hands earning just enough to get her to the next week. None of it was glamorous, but none of it was wasted. Ellen kept something with her that couldn't be taxed, stolen, or denied a notebook. In it, she jotted down one-liners, observations, strange conversations she'd overheard on the bus, jokes that no one else might understand, but they made her laugh. The notebook wasn't about fame. It was about sanity, a lifeline disguised as ink. She began showing up at open mic nights, hole-in-the-wall bars, cafes where the espresso machines were louder than the crowd. Most people weren't even listening. Some nights she bombed so hard she wanted to disappear. But others, a laugh would slip through the noise, a moment of connection. And it was everything. In those seconds, Ellen wasn't broke. She wasn't exhausted. She was alive. But make no mistake, those years were hard. The kind of hard you don't post about. She crashed on couches, wondered if she was wasting her time, performed to empty rooms and still had to wait tables afterward. No followers, no validation, just grit. And yet, those were the years that made her. The years that taught her to be funny without applause, to create without a deadline, to believe without proof. She learned how to keep going, not because someone told her she was great, but because something inside her refused to quit. She learned that silence doesn't mean failure. It means practice. It means preparation. And when the world finally showed up to laugh with her, she was ready. Not because she had been discovered, but because she had endured. Because when you've performed for silence, every laugh that follows feels like gold. In 1986, Ellen DeGeneres was still a name written in pencil, not yet etched in history. She wasn't famous. She wasn't polished. She was a young stand-up comic grinding out 10-minute sets in smoky clubs and coffee shops paid in drink tickets and barely enough gas money to make it home. Her audience was often half asleep, half distracted, and half interested. But even in those spaces, something about her stood out: a stillness, a rhythm, a kind of humor that didn't demand your attention, but earned it. Then the call came. The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, the gold standard for comedians. For decades, getting on Carson meant more than just national TV exposure. It meant legitimacy. It meant the gatekeeper of American comedy had noticed you. And if Carson invited you to sit down after your set, that unspoken gesture meant something even bigger. You belonged. Ellen walked on that stage with no gimmicks, no flashy persona, just a black blazer, soft poise, and a story about God. Her jokes were clever, but gentle, thoughtful, but light. She didn't punch down. She didn't try to shock. Her comedy was observational, disarming, and wrapped in warmth. The audience laughed not because she attacked, but because she understood. And then it happened. As she turned to walk off stage, Johnny Carson, the kingmaker himself, smiled and gestured toward the couch. It was subtle, brief, but in the world of late-night television, it was a coronation. Carson didn't do that often. That couch wasn't just furniture, it was a throne. And in that moment, Ellen sat down not just beside a host, but across from the future that had once seemed impossible. For Ellen, that invitation was more than validation. It was redemption. Years of being overlooked. Working double shifts, painting houses under the Louisiana heat, all of it led to this one moment. She wasn't just funny for a woman, or good for a newcomer. She was great, period. And the entire country now knew it. That night, the doors opened. Club bookings turned into theater tours. Guest spots turned into interviews. But something more important happened too. Ellen stopped questioning whether she belonged. Because now she had proof, not from tabloids or talent scouts, but from the most trusted voice in comedy. She had crossed the invisible line from obscurity to undeniability. This wasn't just a career milestone. It was the leap. And once she landed, the world would never unsee her again. In 1997, Ellen DeGeneres did something that very few public figures, especially women in entertainment, had dared to do. She told the truth, just 3 words: quiet, direct, courageous. "I'm gay." It was said in a magazine interview, not screamed, not staged. But in that era, those words were a cultural earthquake. Not because people didn't suspect, but because no one had ever said it so openly, so publicly, and so unapologetically from the center of American primetime television. At the time, Ellen wasn't just a stand-up comedian or a guest star. She was the lead of a hit sitcom bearing her own name. Ellen aired weekly across the country, pulling in millions of viewers. She had finally made it the kind of success most comedians only dream of. But the moment she stepped into her truth, everything around her started to unravel. Advertisers pulled their money. Conservative groups launched boycotts. Affiliates in multiple states refused to air her show. Newspapers ran sensationalist headlines. And just like that, the funny, charming woman America had welcomed into their living rooms became the target of a cultural firestorm. But it wasn't just Ellen the celebrity who came out. It was Ellen the human being. She wove her own coming out into her character's storyline. In one historic episode, Ellen Morgan said the words on air, "I'm gay." It was a groundbreaking moment in television history, the first time a lead character in a primetime network sitcom came out on screen. It should have been a celebration of progress. But the celebration didn't last. Within a year, the show was canceled. Casting offers stopped coming. Red carpet invitations disappeared. The industry, always quick to applaud bravery in award speeches, suddenly acted as though she didn't exist. And then came the silence. No stages, no scripts, just threats, rejection, emptiness. Ellen didn't just lose her career, she lost her safety. She received death threats. She became a political talking point. Her name went from sitcom star to media target overnight. But even in the darkest moments, Ellen didn't retreat. She didn't deny it. She didn't walk it back. She stood by her truth even when it stood alone, even when it cost her everything. Because to Ellen, truth was never something to be ashamed of. It wasn't a scandal. It was survival. And some legacies are born not from laughter, but from the silence you dare to break. When the spotlight disappeared, it didn't go quietly. It left a vacuum. A kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it swallows. After her historic coming out, Ellen DeGeneres wasn't simply out of work. She was cut off. The phones stopped ringing. The scripts stopped arriving. TV executives who once celebrated her humor and charm now saw her as a liability. Not because her talent had vanished, but because her truth had become too visible. Hollywood didn't just turn its back, it closed the gates. For nearly 3 years, Ellen vanished from public view, not by intention, but by rejection. She didn't step away to find herself. She was pushed. And in a culture where silence often feels like erasure, Ellen faced a terrifying question. What if the truth that set me free also cost me everything? There were no paparazzi now, no red carpets, just long unlit days, and even longer nights. But while the world forgot her name, she didn't forget who she was. In the stillness, Ellen began to do the work that few ever see: the rebuilding. Not of her career, but of herself. She returned to the page, to reading, to sitting with memories that had long gone unspoken. The trauma from childhood, the shame she'd carried in silence, the ache of rejection not just from an industry, but from a society that praised authenticity, until it became uncomfortable. This wasn't a retreat, it was a reckoning. And yes, she could have walked away. She had the money. She had a legacy already carved. But something deeper held her in place, a quiet, stubborn belief that the world could change, that perhaps one day being honest wouldn't come at such a brutal cost. And when that day arrived, she wanted to still be standing. So she waited, not idly, but deliberately. Those years in the shadows became a kind of training ground. Ellen learned to sit in silence, to face doubt without losing faith, to find strength not in applause, but in solitude. And though she was no longer on stage, the voice inside her, the one that used to bring rooms to tears and laughter, never truly dimmed. It whispered, "You're not finished." And when the time came, she didn't crawl back. She returned, not as the same woman, but as someone tempered by fire, sharpened by silence, and grounded in truth. Before the comeback, before the revival, before the world would welcome her again, she had to walk every inch of the darkness with no spotlight to guide her, only instinct, and the unshakable hope that sometimes the greatest chapters begin when no one is watching. In 2003, Ellen DeGeneres did what many thought was impossible. She came back. After years of being cast out, labeled, and left behind, she stepped back into the spotlight, not with rage or resentment, but with rhythm, with music, with movement, and above all, with kindness. The Ellen DeGeneres Show wasn't just a talk show. It was a second act few people ever get, and even fewer used to uplift others. From the very first moments of the very first episode, Ellen made it clear this wasn't going to be about scandal or celebrity feuds. This was going to be about connection, about laughter, about joy, and about making people from Hollywood stars to everyday heroes feel like they mattered. Her style was unlike anything daytime television had seen. She danced through the audience aisles, pulled pranks on A-listers, and gave voice to stories that would otherwise never be told. She didn't just interview actors. She honored school teachers, celebrated veterans, spotlighted children with rare diseases or extraordinary talents. What set Ellen apart wasn't just her humor. It was her heart. Be kind to one another wasn't a catchphrase, it was a commitment. One she renewed every single day for 19 seasons. Through her platform, Ellen gave away over $70 million to individuals and causes in need, from families who had lost everything to students trying to pay for college, to strangers who showed kindness when no one was watching. She didn't just highlight goodness, she rewarded it. And America responded. Ratings soared. Audiences laughed, cried, and clapped along. For nearly 2 decades, The Ellen Show became a part of people's daily lives, a reliable dose of optimism in a world that often felt too heavy. But perhaps the most powerful part of Ellen's return was what remained unspoken. She had once lost everything for telling the truth about who she was. And now she was being celebrated not despite that truth, but because of the strength it took to carry it. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't dwell on the past. She simply showed up every single day and made people smile. Because Ellen understood something the world had once forgotten. That kindness, when it's consistent, when it's intentional, when it's real, doesn't just heal people. It rebuilds them. For nearly 2 decades, Ellen DeGeneres stood as a beacon of joy and generosity. Her show had become synonymous with light-hearted laughter, tearful surprises, and the signature phrase that echoed through millions of living rooms. Be kind to one another. She had crafted a world where kindness was currency, and the public adored her for it. But in 2020, that world cracked. It began with a tweet, a simple message from a former employee suggesting that behind the scenes, kindness wasn't always the reality. That tweet opened a door. More stories followed, stories about toxic work environments, mistreatment, and silence from those in power. Some were vague, some deeply personal. And for the first time in years, Ellen's name was no longer trending for joy, but for scrutiny. The backlash came fast. Articles flooded the internet. Former staffers spoke out. Anonymous sources painted a picture of a workplace that felt cold. Hierarchical, even hostile, a stark contrast to the warmth viewers saw on screen. Ellen herself wasn't accused of direct abuse, but the criticism was clear. How could the face of kindness allow unkindness to grow beneath her watch? To many, the revelations felt like betrayal. It wasn't just about workplace behavior, it was about trust. The woman who had built a brand on being relatable and good-hearted now stood accused of being disconnected, protected, and blind to the very culture she claimed to rise above. Ellen issued a public apology. She stood on her stage, trembling, raw human, and said she was sorry. She took responsibility for what happened behind the curtain, acknowledged the pain expressed by former employees, and promised change. But something had shifted. The magic for some had dulled, not because Ellen was evil, but because she was flawed. And the world, which had once needed her optimism, now demanded her accountability. It was a hard fall. Not from fame she remained successful, but from the pedestal the world had placed her on. The icon hadn't shattered, but the shine had worn off. Still, Ellen didn't run. She didn't hide. She finished the season. She faced the criticism. And she reminded people subtly and powerfully that even those who preach kindness are still learning how to live it fully. Because kindness isn't a destination, it's a practice. And sometimes even the kindest among us have to start over. It wasn't the way anyone imagined the Ellen DeGeneres show would begin its 18th season. Gone were the dancers. Gone was the booming applause, the casual humor, the opening monologue filled with punchlines and celebrity nods. Instead, the lights dimmed just enough to reveal a woman alone on stage. No guests, no props, just Ellen. And for the first time in years, she wasn't there to make people laugh. She was there to say she was sorry. Her voice trembled slightly. Her smile, usually effortless, looked weighed down. She looked out at a mostly empty audience thanks to the pandemic and addressed millions through the camera. Her words were simple, measured, and deliberate. She acknowledged the stories, the hurt, the disappointment, and most of all, the gap between who she aspired to be and what had happened behind the scenes. For things that shouldn't have happened, she said, "I take that very seriously. And I want to say I am so sorry to the people who were affected." It wasn't defensive. It wasn't flashy. It was real, honest, vulnerable in a way daytime television rarely allows. For a long time, Ellen had been seen as untouchable, the smiling queen of feel-good TV. But now she stood not as an icon, but as a human. One who had made mistakes. One who was willing to own them. Some accepted her apology with open hearts. Others remained skeptical, their trust shaken too deeply. But no matter the reaction, one thing was undeniable: it took courage. In an industry built on illusion, Ellen chose transparency. She didn't vanish. She didn't delegate the blame. She showed up. Not with perfect answers, but with accountability. Still, even apologies come with consequences. The energy of the show shifted. Viewers once loyal became hesitant. Ratings declined. Advertisers pulled back. The show felt heavier, as if both host and audience were now carrying a quiet grief for what had been lost. And perhaps that's the hardest part of public redemption, knowing that saying sorry doesn't always bring people back. Sometimes it simply allows you to move forward with integrity. Ellen finished that season, and then another. But the end was coming, not with a scandal, but with a sigh. a quiet understanding that every chapter, no matter how beloved, must close eventually. Not every story ends in triumph, but some end in truth. And in that moment, under soft lights, with a cracking voice and honest eyes, Ellen did the hardest thing any public figure can do. She stood still and told the truth about herself. When the lights began to dim and the crowd slowly drifted away, Ellen DeGeneres was left with something far more enduring than applause love. Not the kind that headlines chase, not the kind built on public image or paparazzi photos, but the quiet, steady kind, the kind that stays. Long before the world embraced her, Ellen had to fight for the right to love openly. Her relationship with actress Anne Heck in the late 1990s had been a tabloid frenzy. They faced red carpets where they weren't welcome. They were mocked, judged, excluded, simply for holding hands. And when that relationship ended, it left behind more than heartbreak. It left a wound shaped by public scrutiny. For a while, Ellen didn't know if she could trust again, not just in another person, but in the world's ability to let her love freely. Then came Portia de Rossi, elegant, grounded, private. Portia didn't try to fix Ellen, she simply accepted her. Their relationship unfolded slowly, far from the spotlight at first. But what grew between them wasn't just romance, it was refuge. In a life defined by camera angles and applause, Portia became the safe space Ellen didn't know she needed. In 2008, they married, a deeply personal act that became a public symbol. Two women legally bound in a country still divided on what that meant. But they didn't marry for symbolism. They married because they were home to each other. Over the years, as Ellen's career soared and stumbled, Portia remained the constant. During the glory days, she stood by proudly, quietly, never needing the spotlight. And during the hardest days, the headlines, the accusations, the tears behind closed doors, she was still there. Not with grand speeches or social media declarations, but with small gestures, a hand on Ellen's back, a walk in the garden, dinner at home. Silence when the world got too loud. Love, when it's real, doesn't need to perform. And that's what Ellen found. Not a perfect love, not a storybook one, but a partnership built on shared, quiet, mutual respect and the belief that healing is possible not through fame, but through connection. In the end, it wasn't the millions of viewers who held Ellen together. It was one person, one heart, one home. Because when everything else fades, the spotlight, the noise, the legacy, what remains is who still chooses to stay. For most of her life, Ellen DeGeneres had been in motion, dancing, hosting, performing, making others laugh even when her own heart was heavy. Her energy became a trademark, fast, witty, physical. But as the years passed, something shifted. Quietly at first, like a whisper, she tried to ignore. Then louder, her body began to rebel. By her mid-60s, Ellen had started talking about it subtly, candidly, sometimes even through humor. But beneath the smile was a hard truth. She was in pain, daily chronic pain. Her bones, once so quick to move, began to ache without warning. Osteoporosis, arthritis, OCD, ADHD. Conditions she had carried for years, some publicly known, others silently endured. Simple tasks became complicated. Walking across the studio, standing through long rehearsals, even holding her signature dance routines, the very thing that had become her television trademark, became increasingly difficult. And for someone whose identity had always been tied to energy, the betrayal of her own body felt deeply personal. She joked about it, of course. That was her nature. Getting old isn't for sissies, she'd say. But beneath the comedy was something more fragile: frustration, vulnerability. The realization that strength wasn't just about pushing through, sometimes it was about slowing down. Ellen began to retreat, not dramatically but gently. She spent more time away from cameras, more mornings in bed, more quiet evenings with Portia surrounded by pets, far from the noise of production meetings or red carpet flashes. And yet, there was no bitterness. Instead, there was an acceptance, a kind of soft surrender, not in defeat, but in understanding. Her body, like everything else in life, had changed. It had limits now, boundaries. But within those boundaries, she found something unexpected: peace. For the first time in decades, Ellen no longer had to perform to feel worthy. She no longer needed to be on to be loved. She could rest, be still. And even when she didn't feel strong physically, she had never been stronger emotionally. Because aging doesn't erase who you are, it reveals what truly matters. And for Ellen, the applause was nice, but the quiet, the stillness, that was something she'd never had, and now she cherished it. When the applause quieted, when the bright lights dimmed, when the world grew distant and uncertain, one hand never let go. Portia de Rossi wasn't just Ellen DeGeneres' partner. She was her anchor, her mirror, her gentle reminder that even when the world turns cold, love can still feel like spring. Through decades of fame, missteps, and redemption, Portia had always stood just slightly behind Ellen, not in the shadows, but in quiet strength. When Ellen danced across stages, Portia smiled from the sidelines. When Ellen faced backlash, Portia pulled her closer. And when Ellen began to physically and emotionally tire, Portia stepped forward, not as a rescuer, but as a presence. Ellen had always been the strong one, the entertainer, the face. But now, at a time when her body slowed, her energy faded, and the world's applause no longer drowned out the internal noise, it was Portia's quiet strength that carried them both. They didn't need public declarations. Their love was in the everyday. A fresh cup of tea on the nightstand, a gentle reminder to rest. A hand reached out in silence when words felt too heavy. They found comfort not in red carpets, but in Sunday mornings on their farm, surrounded by rescue dogs, blooming lavender, and nothing to prove. When Ellen's health challenges began to take a toll, the arthritis, the bone loss, the anxiety, the stillness forced upon a woman who had always been in motion, Portia didn't panic. She adjusted. She rearranged their life not around Ellen's fame, but around Ellen's needs. Soft furniture, slower days, fewer guests, more books. They no longer needed the spotlight. Their light came from within. What made it extraordinary wasn't grand gestures, but the consistency. Portia showed up every day. She didn't try to fix Ellen's pain. She didn't offer platitudes. She simply stayed. In the dark, in the doubt, in the quiet. Because love, real love, doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like remaining. Through discomfort, through decline, through everything. And in a world that once celebrated Ellen for being strong. Alone, it became clear her greatest strength wasn't her humor, her resilience, or even her fame. It was knowing finally what it felt like to be fully supported. Not by an audience, but by one hand, one woman, one vow repeated not on a stage, but every ordinary day. I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere. After decades in front of the camera, the bright lights, the laughter, the scrutiny, Ellen DeGeneres did something rare in the world of fame. She walked away, not in shame, not in anger, not as a fall from grace, but as a conscious, gentle decision to simply live. There was no dramatic exit, no farewell tour, just an announcement. Season 19 would be the last. And when that final curtain fell, Ellen didn't cling to the spotlight. She didn't seek a new stage. She didn't chase reinvention. Instead, she chose something far more radical: peace. She and Portia retreated to their home in Montecito, a quiet coastal town where the ocean hums softly in the background and the days move at their own pace. The sprawling property, surrounded by olive trees and rescued animals, became more than a house. It became a sanctuary. For the first time in her adult life, Ellen didn't have to perform. She didn't need punchlines or perfect lighting. Mornings began with birdsong, not makeup calls. Afternoons were filled with gardening, not guest segments. She walked barefoot on the grass, cooked slowly, sat still. And something unexpected happened. She didn't miss the noise. After years of chasing visibility, she found beauty in being unseen, in anonymity, in the way the sun hits the trees just before dusk, in listening to wind rather than studio applause, in hearing her own thoughts, not for a monologue, not for content, but just because. Fame had given her many things: opportunity, influence, wealth. But it had also taken. It had taken silence, stillness, time. And now she was reclaiming it all. Ellen once said she felt guilty for living such a quiet life while others were still struggling. But she also realized something else: you can't give joy to the world if you're empty inside. And so, in that quiet retreat, she wasn't disappearing, she was recharging, rediscovering the parts of herself that didn't belong to an audience. There were no more red carpets, no awards shows, no pressure to be on. Just mornings with tea, afternoons with Portia, nights with stars and silence. For a woman who had spent her life helping others feel seen. This chapter wasn't about being noticed, it was about being whole. And sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is step out of the light to finally see yourself clearly. When the spotlight fades, what remains? For Ellen DeGeneres, it's not just 33 Emmy Awards, a Presidential Medal of Freedom, or decades of prime-time ratings. Her legacy isn't a trophy shelf. It's the echo of laughter in hospital rooms, classrooms, and living rooms across America. It's the courage she handed to others, often without even knowing it. Because what Ellen gave the world wasn't just entertainment. It was permission. Permission to be different, to be loud or quiet, to dance badly, to come out, to fall apart and start again, to speak up, to sit down, to make mistakes, to apologize, to keep going. In a culture obsessed with flawless heroes, Ellen was something rarer, relatable. She was the woman who got it wrong, laughed about it, and tried again. She didn't sell perfection. She offered presence. She turned awkwardness into charm. She turned silence into space. And she turned pain, deep, hidden private pain, into something that made the world a little lighter, a little funnier, a little kinder. There were moments when the world turned on her, when her message of kindness was questioned, when the image didn't match the backstage. And yet, even then, her legacy persisted, not in spotless perfection, but in the truth that kindness is a practice, messy, daily, earned. Ellen didn't just open doors, she knocked down walls. She was the first openly gay woman to lead a major network sitcom, the first to come back after being canceled and build something even bigger. She used her seat at the table to make room for others, to highlight good in places the world wasn't looking, to give without asking for credit. She made millions laugh, but more than that, she made them feel. And maybe that's the most powerful legacy of all, being remembered not just for what you did, but for how you made others feel in your presence. Seen, accepted, safe. Today, Ellen lives a quieter life. There are no bright lights, no scripted moments. just gardens, animals, books, and long walks with the woman she loves. But the world she helped shape, the comedians she paved the way for, the lives she touched, the culture she dared to shift, still carries her fingerprints. Because true legacy isn't built on applause, it's built on impact. If Ellen's journey moved you from pain to peace, from spotlight to silence, let us know what part of her story touched you the most in the comments. Have you ever reached a point where you chose peace over performance? We'd love to hear your story below. And if you believe in honoring those who dared to rise, fall, and rise again, subscribe to USA Legends Never Fade. Here we don't just tell stories, we keep legacies alive. This is more than a tribute. It's a reminder, legends don't disappear, they evolve.